I found a ghost in my backyard, and it was watching me. A shadow moved across the moonlit grass. My breath caught in my throat. I froze, unsure whether I was dreaming or if something was really out there, just beyond the trees. And then it looked back at me. It was a quiet night in my suburban neighborhood. The kind of night where the only sound was the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. I was just about to turn in when I heard a faint, almost inaudible sound from the backyard. It wasn't the wind. This was something different. The sound of a branch snapping, perhaps, or a footstep. I froze, staring out the window. My backyard was bathed in the soft glow of the moon, the garden lights flickering slightly in the wind. But there, in the far corner of the yard, something moved. My breath caught in my throat. At first, I thought it was just an animal, a deer or maybe a raccoon. But no, it was too tall, too human. I grabbed my phone and peered through the glass, heart pounding. My palms were slick with sweat. There, standing just beyond the fence line, was a figure. At first, I thought it might be a trick of the shadows, but no. This thing was solid. Pale skin, no hair. Its eyes reflected the moonlight, glowing faintly as they stared straight back at me. I blinked. My heart stopped. It was watching me. My breath hitched in my chest as I backed away from the window. Was this some kind of joke? No, I knew it wasn't. There was no way. I was alone in the house. Just me, and whatever that was. I glanced at the clock. 2:43 a.m. It was too late for anyone to be out there. I stood frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. The figure didn't move. It didn't have to. It was just there, watching. I wanted to scream, to call someone, anyone, but my mouth felt dry. The seconds stretched into eternity. Then, the thing took a step forward. My pulse raced. My stomach churned. I turned, stumbling to the door, but just as I reached for the handle, I froze again. What if it comes inside? I hesitated. The air felt thick and oppressive, like a weight pressing down on my chest. Slowly, I pulled the door open a crack, enough to peek out into the yard. There was no sign of the figure anymore. It was gone, but I knew something deep in my gut. It wasn't gone. It was still out there, waiting. Days later, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I stepped outside, my eyes darted nervously around the yard. The trees swayed in the wind, the shadows long and creeping, but there was never anything there. Not until one night, when I decided to confront it. That night, I stood at the back door, watching the yard. My mind raced with questions. What had I seen? Was it real? Was it a hallucination? A product of too much stress, too many sleepless nights? But then, I saw it again. The figure, standing by the fence, watching me. It wasn't an illusion. It was real. And this time, it moved toward me, gliding silently over the grass, its pale, expressionless face staring at me the entire time. I gasped, backing away, my heart hammering in my chest. Before I could turn to run, I heard a voice. Not a sound, but a whisper in my mind. Why did you leave me? I blinked, the words hanging in the air like smoke. My knees buckled, and I collapsed to the floor. The ghost was speaking to me. But how? I couldn't move. My head spun as memories I had long forgotten came flooding back. The truth comes out. Weeks passed, and the haunting didn't stop. The figure remained, appearing outside my window, following me around my house, sometimes even appearing in the reflection of the mirror when I wasn't looking. Each time, I heard that same voice in my head. Why did you leave me? I began to unravel the mystery. My family had lived in this house for generations. My great-grandfather had built it. But there was something about the land that had always unsettled me. I dug through old documents, photos, and journals until I stumbled upon a story I hadn't known, a tragedy that had occurred before I was born. The backyard, I learned, had once been the site of a small graveyard. The land was sacred to an old family that had lived here long before us. They were my ancestors, distant relatives who had vanished mysteriously one winter night. The locals said they had been cursed for meddling with things they didn't understand, things beyond the living's control. The figure outside was one of them, a forgotten soul. And then it hit me. The voice wasn't just a ghost asking for attention. It was a voice of my sister, my little sister who had died when I was only 6 years old. I had blocked out the memory, buried it deep, but now I knew the truth. The ghost in my backyard was her. She had died in a tragic accident. I was too young to understand it at the time, but now the memory resurfaced in sharp clarity. I had been there, playing with her in the backyard, when she had fallen into the old well. I had tried to pull her out, but she'd slipped away, drowned, her small hand reaching up to me as if to say goodbye. I had blamed myself. I had always blamed myself. And now she was back. The final encounter. I stood in the backyard one final time, my heart in my throat, staring at the dark shadows in the corner of the yard where I had last seen her. The moonlight bathed everything in silver, and the cold air nipped at my skin. I whispered her name, barely able to speak through the lump in my throat. Emma. She appeared, my little sister, pale and ghostly, standing where the well used to be. Her eyes, now empty of warmth, stared at me with the same sad look I remembered. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The guilt, the sorrow in her eyes said everything. But then I understood. The haunting wasn't just her desire for revenge. It was her way of reaching out, of telling me she had never truly left. All this time, I had been running from the truth. But now, I had to face it. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice breaking. The figure didn't move. It didn't speak. It simply watched me, its face a mirror of the pain I had carried for so long. And then, with a faint shimmer in the air, she was gone. The backyard was silent, but I knew, wherever she was now, she wasn't watching me anymore. Epilogue. In the weeks that followed, the haunting stopped. The figure never returned, but I couldn't forget the look in her eyes, the sorrow, the longing, the grief. I had finally set her free, and in doing so, I had freed myself.